What is up, fellas and lady fellas? Welcome back to Just Nuts, guys. Today, we've got another deck profile for you. Today, we're doing SATELLARKNIGHts or TELLARKNIGHts, I guess, because some other cards aren't exactly SATELLARKNIGHts. Whatever, TELLARKNIGHts. This is a really cool deck. This is a deck that has been like a fairly like fan favorite for a while. Very, very linear play style. Very, very control based with some very, very powerful effects, specifically Trevere and some other stuff as well that you can take advantage of. But yeah, it's a really cool control deck. It's been around for a while. This is like one of those decks that's like at the very top of my list. Like honestly, if you were to ask me one deck that you think like Konami should throw support for, it might be this, because this deck has not gotten support in so long. And I just think like design wise, a ton of people love the artwork for this deck. A lot of people who love control decks, this could be one of their favorite decks just because back in the day this was one of the best decks in the game, so a lot of people have nostalgia for it, and it just hasn't gotten support in so long. So today I'm giving my MR4 Eternity Code updated deck list here. Nothing too crazy, but there is some cool spice in here, so we'll get to that as we go. But without further ado, let's just jump right into it. Starting with the monster lineup, this is going to be pretty standard. You're going to see this almost everywhere you go. Looking at this deck profile, we're going to play 3 copies of Deneb, 3 copies of Unical High, 3 copies of Altair, and 2 copies of Vega. This is like super standard as far as things go. You might see small changes, like maybe 1 Vega instead of 2, or maybe 2 Unical High instead of 3. But other than that, everything's pretty standard. If you don't know what they do, they're all very, very simple effects. They all have effects that pop off on normal or special summon. Deneb is the best one. It's your Stratus. Just search as another SATELLARKNIGHT monster. Altair can special one from grave in defense mode, but locks you out of attacking except for TELLARKNIGHT with TELLARKNIGHT monsters till the end of the turn, but he's very important for your grind game and your extendability. Unical High, Foolish Burials any TELLARKNIGHT monster from your deck to the graveyard, which is a pseudo starter. It's not my favorite card, honestly. You need to see it with like a combination of another card, but still it's the biggest one, and it does like help set up your graveyard. And then Vega helps you special from hand. Sometimes you already have like a combo, but you also have a free search, so sometimes you're just going to get this just so that you get that extra body on board if you're already going to go through your combo. So yeah, not too much to say here. The only thing I will say is I don't like Unical High. I think it's just too slow. We can't really afford to play just like 8 reborn like cards in our deck anymore. So this is just like a pseudo starter, not a good starter. Deneb's the only one that's like a legit starter. And so I would love to get like a new monster that kind of power creeps Unical High out of the deck, honestly. She's cool, and maybe she'd be a cool one of for like specific situations, but I think just like for where the deck is now and like where the meta is now, you just need to be faster, and Unical High is like really slow as far as what the deck wants to do. And then the only other monster we play is 3 Ash. It's just nice, versatile, defensive coverage for any deck. This is going to hit pretty much any deck in the game, and you don't just want to let anything go first on you and do whatever they want. So Ash, just versatile, going first, it's another disruption, but also going second gives you a chance to slow your opponent down. Then we move to the spells, starting off with 3 SATELLARKNIGHT Skybridge. I really, really like this card. If I could give one card of support to this deck, it would be a new level 4 monster that just says on summon, you can add a Tellar, Tellar, spell or trap card from your deck to your hand, and this would be one of the best cards you could take advantage of that with, because you could literally go summon him, search this, use this to special Deneb straight from the deck, and then Deneb would get you your search. So it's almost just like you opened Deneb. So it's just like a super boost to consistency. If you don't know what this card does, it's a quick effect that lets you target a TELLARKNIGHT you control, special summon one with another name from your deck, and then you shuffle the one that was you targeted originally back into the deck. So you kind of swap them, but when you're swapping for Deneb, you're getting a +1. Swap for Altair, he gets another body on board, +1, right? So, or well, not even a 1. It's like a 1-for-1 kind of, but it's consistency and getting you to the right ones, because Deneb is like the only legit starter monster in the deck. Then for the rest of the spells, we're on 2 copies of Pot of Desires, 1 copy of Reinforcement of the Army. This is a warrior deck, so you got to play that. 1 Upstart Goblin for draw power, and then 1 copy of Super Polymerization for like the kind of spice, pretty much. Looking at these, Desires is nice. You're playing 3 of pretty much all the important cards of your deck, and this isn't a super search heavy deck. I mean, it's really mainly just Deneb, so as long as you don't banish all 3 copies of like Altair or something, you should be fine. Rhoda, just like I said, super like basic, a little bit of extra draw power, 39 card deck. And then Super Poly, this is the one like interesting card I'll say here. So because of Verte Anaconda, you don't need to play multiple copies of this. This can still just be a one of in the deck. Where going second versus multiple decks in the meta, you can still hit them with this, which is still good. But with Verte Anaconda, you're not forced to play 3. I know it won't be a quick effect off Verte Anaconda. I know it'll be respondable, but you also don't have to discard, and it rips multiple bodies off the field all at once. So it has its, its pluses and its minuses, as always, as with any card. And yeah, it's good. I mean, yeah, it's just a one of. I just think it's good. There's no reason. Like, space was kind of tight, and I didn't want to just play like too many copies of this, because I think Eldritch and Adamantipator aren't decks that like really just died of Super Poly just yet. So they're not like, it's not the best versus them, and those are like the 2 most represented decks in the game. So just a one of there, so you don't see it too much versus those. And then for the traps, this is like the main part of the deck, because this is a control type strategy. We'll start with the counter traps. We've got 3 copies of Stellar Nova Alpha, 3 copies of Solemn Judgment, and 2 copies of Solemn Strike. These are it for our counter traps. These are all very powerful. I really appreciate this card, and also, if they decide to make that monster I said would be so clean if they ever made, it would be able to search this as well, and you wouldn't be forced to play this as a 3 of, because you'd be able to pretty consistently search this out and at least just set up an Omni Negate, which is so good, man. That's why Subterrors were my favorite control deck back like last format, because like I love a control deck that like naturally searches a negate of one of the blowout cards. I mean, you're going to see Evenly Matched, you're going to see Lightning Storm, sided out the Dickens, and so when you have a control deck that can that has access to like a lot of these cards, and there's 6 right there that just shut those down, so already that's like pretty good going first to just handle those terrifying side options. And then Judgment and Strike, I don't really need to explain those, just great control like traps. And then we play 3 copies of Call of the Haunted. This is really just a staple in this deck at this point. What's super busted is our Exceed monster bounces every card on the field back to the hand other than himself. So if you use Call of the Haunted to revive a monster, use that monster as Exceed material for the monster that's going to bounce everything. This card doesn't leave the field because the monster was used as Exceed material, not just sent to the graveyard or destroyed or whatever. So then this card actually gets bounced back to your hand off of Trevere, and you can set it and use it again next turn. So you just keep rotating this, and it's very good. You don't want to play too many copies of like Reborn spells, because opening too many is really bad, but I still think this card's like really good for the grind game in this deck. 3 impermanents, pair this with Ash, and the 1 Super Poly, and that's like your suite of like going second cards that just help you not just auto lose if somebody sets up. Somebody would be playing a combo deck going first versus you. 2 copies of Crackdown. This card is also really nice. It's another continuous trap, so you can steal something from your opponent so they don't get to use it. And then if you're able to get to Trevere, you'll just bounce everything, including this. If this never got removed off the field, then you'll be able to set it and use it again on the following turn. Same thing. And the last card is a card I actually don't have on me. I thought I did have it, but I actually don't. This is 2 copies of Anti-Spell Fragrance, one of the most busted cards in this deck at the moment. And honestly, I wouldn't even hate it if you wanted to play 3 of this. I just really liked having a lot of like versatility with my traps, and also like space was kind of a thing. I guess I could easily just drop like an impermanence or something, or a I don't know. You could drop anything, like really. Like I could just drop the Upstart if I really wanted to, because this card's actually so clean in this deck, because what happens is if you activate this, people are going to try and just set all their spells, so that next turn, assuming they survive because you're not really playing an OTK deck, they plan on just using their spells all next turn and just doing what they would do that turn, but the following turn, assuming they didn't just lose in the battle phase. So what this card does in this deck is it makes them do that, set everything, but then if you just go Trevere, you bounce this and all the cards they set this again, and activate it again on their next turn, which means essentially they will never be able to get a chance to activate spells. So any spell-heavy strategy, even if it's not a spell-heavy strategy and they only play like 5 to 10 spells, they could easily, like decks that play 5 to 10 spells could easily open 2 spells in their opening hand. And Anti-Spell just pretty much is going to say, blank, you're going second, but you're actually going second with 4 cards instead of 6, which means if you had 2 other disruptions, it's going to be really tough for them to break through with only that many cards in hand. So some really, really powerful stuff. It turns off Lightning Storm as well, going first after siding and stuff. So that's also really nice. Dark Ruler no more. Not really a big deal versus this deck, but like certain cards. And then moving into the extra deck. So that's the main deck, 40 cards. I think when you don't have like a ton of searchability for your starters and you just need to open a certain amount of starters, you should probably just stick to 40. I think this is not really a deck that like really gets that scary with space, but you know, 40 is pretty easy to manage in my opinion. Then we get to our extra deck. We're going to start with our 3 copies of Satellarknight Travere, or Stellarknight Travere, sorry. 2 copies of Dark Tellarknight Batlamias, 1 copy of Stellarknight Deltaros, and 1 copy of Stellarknight Constellar Diamond. So, getting into these. Okay, we start with Travere. He is our main boss monster. He has so many effects. He's so good. When he's Exceed Summon, is a forced effect. You cannot choose whether or not you want to activate it. It will automatically trigger. He bounces every single card on the field back to the hand except for himself. Your cards, your opponent's cards, spells, traps, anything, back to the hand. Very, very powerful. Also, once per turn, you can attach a material from him to make your opponent randomly discard a card. So now when you bounce stuff back to their hand, you're like, oh, I mean, like, that's good, but if you're not going to kill them, like, they get all those resources back. Well, he's also going to rip one out of the hand at least, so that's pretty good. And then his last effect is if he has a material and he's sent to the graveyard, he can special summon a Tellarknight straight from the graveyard. So, yeah, you go after that, you go Altair. Altair specials the Deneb back from grave. Deneb gets you a search, and, like, your opponent added him, but if they had to out him by letting him go to graveyard, you're just going to get, like, a +3 off of it. So, really, really insane there. Batlamias, really, really good. It's really only good for 2 things in this deck. Travere normally takes 3 Tellarknights, but this card makes it so that Travere only takes 2 Tellarknights and a discard in hand. So much easier to manage. You don't have to get 3 bodies on board. You only need 2 in any discard. And the other thing that matters is this card makes the entire field dark. That doesn't sound too crazy, but it can come up in specific matchups. I would say the most relevant one at the moment is probably Salamangreat, because you could go first, and if you don't even want to go Travere, because like if you discard a Sally that wants to be engraved, it's not even like a minus for them. You could go this and just stop here. He's 2600. He makes all their monsters dark, which means if they try, that means they can't link into Sullying Wolf. It means they can't link into Heat Leo. It means they can't make Pyro Phoenix as long as this card is still on the field. So it actually like can just stonewall them and put them in a really awkward state. So I still really like that. And then the Deltaros and the Constellar Diamond. Deltaros, really good in situations where Travere is not. I mean, Travere bounces everything. So if you're playing something like Subterrors, one of those decks that has like field spells that search, stuff like that, or even Eldritch, if you bounce like Eldritch and like Cursed Eldland back to the hand, they're just going to be able to activate Cursed Eldland and like get more pluses again. So like it really isn't that good. This card at least like forces stuff to the graveyard instead. So like Subterrors, you're just like popping Guru if you baited out a bunch of negates or whatever. And instead of like just bouncing stuff, you're just straight up getting it to the graveyard. And then Constellar Diamond, he also floats as well. He specials from deck when he's sent to the graveyard instead of from grave like Travere does. And the last one is Constellar Diamond. This guy's insane. He has 3 main effects. If your opponent activates a dark monster effect, you can attach a material, negate, and destroy that card. That is not once per turn, so you pretty much have 3 dark monster negates. So against Orcust, auto win. No cards can be sent from the deck straight to the graveyard. Again, beats Orcust. It means like Foolish Burial's offline. It means Orcust Nightmare can't be activated. All that stuff. And then what's the last effect? Oh, if a card to be added from hand or graveyard back to hand, it actually gets banished instead. So that's more so really good against Salamangreat. This card, I know Salamangreat isn't dark, but like this card still, without the negate, like says they can't add anything back. So Sunlight Wolf is essentially useless. And they can't send anything, so it turns off Gazelle, Foolish Burial, and the Sunlight Wolf. So this card's still like pretty good against them, and he's 2700. So those are your like in archetype Exceed monsters there. The only other Exceed I play is one Exciton Knight. This is just like kind of a comeback / like you're losing an advantage. You need to just equalize everything, and if you can get into him, you can potentially just sway the whole tide of the game. So just 1 copy of Evil Swarm Exciton Knight. And then we have Super Poly targets, 1 Starving Venom Fusion Dragon, 1 Predaplant Trifio Veritum, 1 Mud Dragon of the Swamp, and 1 Duplexer Chimera. Not getting too crazy here. I feel like these are all pretty self-explanatory as far as Super Poly targets go. I mean, Verte can get you this every single time, no matter what, because he can turn something dark, and he can use himself and the opponent's dark monster to make this, so like that's crazy easy. Your opponent just has 1 dark monster of their own. You can make this as long as they have a second monster as well, so that's really good. As well as just like if you play Rockets, this is just, if you Super Poly them for this, just auto win. Mud Dragon, also pretty good. like weird matchups like Invoked Eldritch, like Makaba's Light, so is Eldritch, and they're different types, so you can hit them for the Mud Dragon, which is pretty good there. And then the Plexer Chimera, mainly for Salamangreats, but you could run into certain stuff. Sometimes Adamancipator ends on a weird board with like 2 Cyberses on board, because like IP Masquerade has a Cybers, and then if they leave like Link Cross up or go into like a weird link that's Cybers, you could still hit them for this. So that's like just weird, covering other utility things. Or if you just play like you end up having to play something like Adignister, Code Talkers, Math Mechs, Marine Cess, any of those other rogue matchups, it could still come in handy. And then for the links, nothing crazy here either. We see 1 Gravity Controller, 1 Predaplant Verte Anaconda, and 1 Nightmare Phoenix. Gravity Controller, really great because your Exceed monsters just float from being sent to the graveyard. So if you make Trevair or Deltaros in your extra monster zone, you can just link them off for controller and then get their float effects, which is actually really solid. Like, you want to do it all the time. Like, I do it all the time where I just summon them in the extra monster zone just cause, and then because next turn sometimes you may not have a follow-up play, but if you want to make another Trevair or a Deltaros to like get more removal, you just link them off for this, then you get the float, and then you're able to like roll your way into another Trevair or Bounce or a Deltaros pop, which is pretty cool. And then Verte Anaconda, obviously, for the Super Poly. And then Phoenix. I just want to play something else other than Verte that helped make use of Crackdown. If you steal something, sometimes you really want to link their monster off because you're worried they may be able to get themselves into a way to like remove the Crackdown, which will then return their monster to their side of the field, which you really don't want. So I want to play something. It's a 1900 beater. It's very generic, and it could also come in handy to like pop Floodgates or something weird. So yeah, Nightmare Phoenix also. But that's pretty much it for the deck profile, guys. You know, it's not the craziest list, but this is one of those decks that, like, I don't know if you can really afford to play it all too crazy if you're really trying to play it at, like, its highest potential for the moment. And again, I just would really love to see this this deck get support. This is one of those decks where, like, when I was, like, trying to, like, look at decks that could end up in, like, Link Vrain's pack and stuff, I was like, this deck has to end up in there. Like, this deck is just too much of a fan favorite. Dope design, a ton of people love it. Like, I don't see how they avoid this deck. Hopefully they get some like support in the near future. I think it's in Konami's best interest money wise, and I don't know, to appease the player base. But yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. Thank you so much for watching this deck profile as always. Let me know, obviously, any input. I'm not a connoisseur of Tellarknights. I just really like the deck, and it's fun to play, in my opinion. So obviously leave me any like thoughts and comments on the profile down below, any suggestions there, and I will see you in the next video. Subscribe if you want to see more deck profiles from me in the future. I'll see you later. Peace.